joining him, called Stuart Baldwin.
Sorry, say that again.
Baldwin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome indeed to CCA Convention 2020. This year's theme, Fast Forward 2021, reflects just how challenging this year has been for all of us, and quite frankly, we're probably all quite pleased to see the end of it near. But it also reflects the great and incredible pace of change that we've seen in this industry since over the last 7 months. And those phrases, things that normally take months and years, have happened in days and weeks. So a really incredible pace of change. And I think you're going to see this reflected in many of the contributions that we've got over the next few days. Like you, I'm really disappointed that we're not having the buzz of convention when everybody's piling in and people seeing each other, haven't seen each other for quite a long time. So we are going to miss that buzz, there's no denying. But on a positive note, because we've got such amazing technologies, we're now able to involve more people, more teams, and to have some great contributions globally that we may not otherwise have been able to do. So there is a positive in all of this, but we can't deny we're going to miss seeing everybody, and hopefully that won't be too far away when we can get back together. Over the last 7 months, we've spoken to hundreds of organisations and thousands of professionals about all the challenges that we've been facing. We've gathered more learnings, I think it's fair to say, in the last few months than perhaps over the last few years, and that's no different to the experience of lots of organisations who've had to fast forward. The really important thing now for us is that we gather all these learnings, the collective, if you like, and put it together in a way that makes sense, not just for everybody together, but for you as individual brands, because not everybody's recipe is going to be the same when we come out of this pandemic. One of the big learnings for everybody, I think, is just the real challenge in leaders of all levels across every organisation that we deal with. Because there's a really delicate balance emerging between well-being, which is now in every single business decision that we are involved in, and of course the need to look after customers who are anxious and who got more questions than answers. So as well as the well-being of our staff and of our workforce, there's also this need to get back to normal, because customers who may well have forgiven companies at the beginning are now really not all that keen on it because of COVID. So that's a really, really tricky balance to get right, and it's one that I know we're going to be talking a lot about over the next few days. The programme is packed over the next few days. We've got so much in there, something for everyone, but the key thing that I would urge is to take part in the debates and add your voice to this collective. We will be gathering everything as ever to come up with a whole new set of scenarios, which will take us through into 2021, and the work's begun already. We've got so much information, so many great insights, and we really want to work with you to pull all of this together. Many of the services that CCA have been developing over the last few months have been much more bespoke, smaller groups, smaller communities, many more interactions than we would ever have had in the old world, if you like. And we really want to share those with you. So anything that you need, feel you want, please just shout, and we'll see if we can get that agenda included. I'm really looking forward to the next few days, albeit digitally, and I hope that you are too. So it just remains for me to say, enjoy convention.
Are we live? Are we streaming?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, we are. Yes.
Action!
Oh, action!
Touch me, it's so easy to leave me all alone in the memory of my days in the sun. Hello and welcome to this year's CCA Conference 2020.
Why did you sing Memory, and why do you have a cat mask on?
Because, Ian, it's the CCA, the Canadian Cats Association Convention 2020.
It's CCA Global.
Huh? What can we see? Just been a whole flippin' week reception. Canadian Cats! Ah, bloody global!
We're live.
What?
We're still...
Oh, 1, 2, 3. Eyes on me.
1, 2, eyes on you.
Hello and welcome yet again. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sheena Michaels, and I'm going to be your first speaker today to springboard you into the Zoom conference. So apologies if one sets the bar too high. Great one. To my left, to my left is the other half of my support bubble, and this is Ian, and he's just Ian. Say hello.
Hello.
I can hear you all asking, like, what these two randoms got to do with cats?
CCA Global.
CCA Global.
Because believe me, I've been asking us the same question since we got this gig.
I should go. We've been asked because, let me tell you, we are Scotland's leading amateur dramatics theatre group, award-winning, actually. Thank you very much. And tell them, Ian, tell them.
Well, what we have, what would we don't, what we know about communication isn't worth knowing.
Yeah, okay. Well, this year's conference is slightly different, which actually has its upsides, because at any point you can just, selectively mute. Now, over these past 7 months, you've probably been finding motivation hard to muster, purpose hard to purchase, creativity difficult to
Conjure.
enthusiasm impossible to
Engage.
Yep, you've got this. Thank you very much. Thank you. But trust me, the next few hours are gonna rock your Rolodex. It's gonna ding your dongle. It's gonna wow your Wi-Fi.
It's gonna whack your sack.
2 meters, thank you, Ian. So, to finish, when all your Zoom juices are drying up and last night's Deliveroo sitting in the fridge is proving too tempting, ponder this and think how far we've come. Why, this time only last year, we all thought a support bubble was something used for a prolapse.
Oh, sorry.
I'm having some slight difficulty with the picture of the support bubble. I hope you enjoyed that slightly different launch to the CCA Global Convention from Sheena and Ian of the National Theatre of Scotland, who will join us again tomorrow and Thursday. Thanks to them, and of course to Anne-Marie Forsyth for opening convention. I'm Liz Barclay, a director of CCA Global and chair of the Standards Council, and I'm delighted to be your chair for our annual convention 2020, our first online digital annual convention. Welcome. And I'm very pleased to see lots of names I know and lots of names I don't, and some names that I can't identify. If you would like us to know who you are, then we'd love to, obviously. If you can find a few dots somewhere in the corner of your picture, you should be able to change to your name from whatever it says currently on the box. And if you want to be able to see people in speaker view, at the top right hand corner of your screen, you should be able to see a little box that invites you to swap from gallery view to speaker view. Anyway, I think that's all the housekeeping done. The theme of convention this year is Fast Forward 2021, as Anne-Marie said. Now, for the past 6 months, organisations have been working to survive through chronic uncertainty and unpredictability in exceptional circumstances. And we have every reason to take heart from some of the amazingly positive things that have been happening across the sector. And over the next 3 mornings, we'll be hearing a lot more about some of those events. Convention will take place for approximately 2 hours over the next 3 days. And I say approximately, I'm talking about 10 till approximately 12 12:15. So I hope you'll forgive us if we run slightly over the 12 o'clock. We have a fantastic mix of speakers. They're all lined up with different experiences, insights, and ideas that we hope to share with you. So never mind rocking your Rolodex, we're going to be snapping your synapses and provoking best practice. We split the morning into two parts. There will be a comfort break at 11 approximately on each day. And before we start, I would like to thank our sponsors. Our gold sponsors are Ring Central, Twilio and T-Tech. Our silver sponsors are Polly and Tiski, and our research partner is Contact Babel. Now, we'll begin with a conversation with Mark Blythe, who's the co-author of the book Agronomics, and then Anne-Marie and I will bring you up to date with some of the conversations that have been taking place across CCA for the last 7 to 8 months. Following that comfort break, we'll have the first of two industry debates, and today's debate is titled A Global Perspective. We brought together the Bank of New Zealand, T-Tech and Polly to understand what impact the pandemic has had on organizations across the globe. And finally, this morning will be a little bit of magic. We'll be joined by magician Kevin Quantum, also known as Kevin McMahon, and he is one of our top magicians in the UK who very recently performed on Britain's Got Talent. And today, Kevin will be joined by his colleague, Stuart Baldwin. They'll share some tips and ideas to enhance our online conferencing skill set. And throughout the session, if you would like to pose a question, then please do add that to the chat, or a comment. Please add that to the chat, and I will do my best to pick up on those as we go through the morning. So let me introduce our first speaker. Mark Blythe is co-author of Agronomics. He grew up in Dundee. He played bass in rock bands, and they released several, possibly 5-6 albums, all with independent labels. The book Agronomics addresses why measures of stress and anxiety are on the rise when economists and politicians are telling us we've never had it better. While statistics tell us that the vast majority of people are steadily getting richer, the world that most of us experience day in, day out is increasingly uncertain, unfair, ever more expensive. CCA Global CEO Anne-Marie Forsyth caught up with Mark Blythe last week.
Today I'm joined by Mark Blythe, the co-author of Agronomics, a book which explains the rising tide of anger in our population at large. Anger, of course, can be useful and it can also be destructive. And in the book, there's a few proposals for some radical solutions for an increasing polarised and confusing world. I really like the phrase that I read on one of the reviews, which is Agronomics is for anyone wondering where the hell do we go from here, which seems like a fantastic time to be looking at this, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic and given that we're right in the midst, as we speak, of the American elections. So over to Mark. Welcome, Mark.
Nice to be with you.
Okay.
From Rhode Island, by the way. I'm in Rhode Island, just if anybody wants to know.
I should have said that, Rhode Island, which of course is not really an island, but we won't go there.
It's not an island. We're only an island for tax purposes.
So, Mark, when you and I first spoke, I wasn't sure about it. I was expecting a Rhode Island accent, and of course what I got back was a Dundee accent. So there you go.
Funny that.
And still there after all these years. So, Mark, just if you could, our population today, our delegates who are listening, are responsible for devising services to millions of customers about all sorts of things, whether it's banking or health or insurance or whatever else it is. And of course, they meet with those populations. And I think they'd be interested, we'd all be interested just to tell us, you know, why the population at large is getting angrier. What's changed?
Well, what's changed has been changing for 30 years. So one way to think about this is who bears risk. So go back 30, 40 years ago. If you were a manual worker in Glasgow, you're probably covered by a union agreement. The union, in a sense, was shielding you from some risk. It was bargaining for your wages. you're probably covered by some other agreements that allowed you certain time off and benefits and all the rest of it. Similarly, if you were self-employed, right, you were covered by certain protections that were in the law. Progressively over time, we've removed these things. We've shifted the risk from corporates and governments more and more onto individuals. And the question is, do they have the capacity to bear those risks when the world itself becomes more and more uncertain? Now, compound this with this giant rise that we've seen across the Western world in particular in material inequality, with, by some estimates that have just come out, the American figures are absolutely astonishing. There's a new study from Rand Corporation that estimates that if you kept all the taxes, benefits, and regulations in place in 1980 and just ran the numbers up and had the same growth rates going through, then your average worker would be around $20,000 a year richer. But because of the changes that we've made, basically all of that's gone to the top 5% of the population, which by some estimates is some $55 trillion in wealth, which has been siphoned up, but has singularly failed to trickle down. And Britain is just an echo in many ways of what's happened in the US in that regard. So basically this ramping up in inequality makes people's lives more uncertain, more fragile, more vulnerable to shocks. At the same time, there's been a whole host of regulatory and legal changes, which means that they need to bear more of those shocks. So what does that do? It increases the felt uncertainty in their lives. It makes us aware of the gig economy. It gives us terms like the precariat. It gives us minimum wages as maximum wages for large sections of the population. And of course, eventually that pisses people off, because what you're doing is you're putting them in a situation where they cannot control many aspects of their own lives. Think about if you have kids and you have to deal with 0-hour contracts. Think about getting on the train with your lunch because you've been told you're coming into work and then you get a text message that says your hours have been cancelled. That's the world that we're building. And while that's kind of individually rational for firms to do it, don't expect your workers or your consumers to like it because they're on the brunt end of it.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of today, so right now we're in the middle of this pandemic and lots of us, in fact, the industry that we're all involved in, which is people serving customers, has seen this massive transfer back to home working, if you like, something we thought we'd never see, sort of like a hockey stick curve. It was always predicted to grow, but now has grown hugely. And I know it's always been big in the States, but it was never really particularly big in the UK and in Europe. Does that in some way assuage us a bit? Does it make us more in control? What do you think? Does it give back?
In some ways it does, but I mean, in other ways it doesn't. So what we're seeing already in the tech sector in the United States is that firms based in very expensive areas like California and Colorado are saying, oh, Bill, you're doing coding for us in a basement in Rhode Island. Well, in that case, then that's great, keep doing it. But we're not paying any benefits now. You're totally an independent contractor and we're going to cut your wages by a third because it's much cheaper there. More money for me. Right, so we're already seeing that there's a two-way effect on this one. What's not being factored in here is the labour productivity gains. So John Quiggin, who's an Australian economist, pointed this out, and I don't know how we're ever going to see this show up in the figures, but it definitely means something for corporate bottom lines. Historically, regardless of which country you live in, if you're in a sort of rich country, you spend an hour getting to work and an hour getting back. Nobody's doing that now. And from the data that we've seen so far, people are actually starting work 10 minutes early. So what that means is you're working an extra 8 to 10 hours a week that you didn't do before. So in other words, there's an extra day has popped up. This is the largest increase in labour productivity in the history of the world. And we have yet to acknowledge that it's happened. And we have yet to actually see it in the figures. So that tells you something about the way we calculate the figures. So there's definitely an upside in this. The question is, how much of the upside do the actual workers get to keep of this? And my guess is increasingly little.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. What do you think we learned from, or did we learn from 2008 crash? You know, because there was a lot of learnings went on there. A lot of organisations reshaped their thinking, trying to build more trust between organisations and consumers. Did we learn, or in your view, did we not learn?
Well, we did learn, and we learned the following, that you need to give your banks much bigger capital buffers, as they call it. In other words, you can't run with leverage ratios that are insane. That means that if you get a 2% turn against your asset base, you're suddenly insolvent. You've got to have big wedges of cash and other liquid assets. That means that if you run at the bad times, you run through this before you run to the public purse. If you notice and so far at least in the COVID pandemic, the one sector that hasn't needed a bailout has been banking. So clearly we did something right in the reboot of that sector, but what we actually did, unfortunately, was fragilise all the other sectors. And you see this particularly in the US, less so in the UK, with the phenomenon of share buybacks. So why should I bother to actually invest in plant equipment, higher wages, skills, training, when I can just I can borrow money at 0% and then issue a bond at a negative real rate if I'm a company like Apple, and then use the cash from that to buy back my own shares and effectively reap a 6% equity gain. So what we've done is we've turned our companies increasingly into financial machines, whereby the product is secondary. And the best example of this is the disaster that has become the Boeing Corporation, where they have planes that nobody wants. One of them is basically unsafe to fly, and they spent $48 billion on buybacks. So we learned stuff in banking. We totally didn't learn, and we transferred all those risks to the rest of the economy.
What can we learn from this pandemic? What can make us less angry? What do you think? What's the tips? If you were advising government, let's say you're advising the new government in the States, you're advising the government here in the UK, what would you advise?
Couple of easy lifts. One thing that really makes people angry is having no control over their working hours. So basically ban 0-hour contracts. Just right there, just done. Dead easy, one little line of legislation, over. What else could you do? Well, when you basically, your personality of the year is Marcus Rashford, because he's pointed out that since 1980, the UK economy has doubled in size and trebled in wealth, and yet you need to have 1.7 million people a day receiving school meals, then you have a serious problem with hunger and poverty. And stop calling it social exclusion or other bullshit terms. Call it what it is. You've got tons of poor people because you don't pay them enough. So figure out how you're going to pay them more. If you stabilize people's hours and pay them a bit more, they will be a lot less angry. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. And one of the features, I suppose, for the whole customer service industry has probably been quite good at that, being good at flexibility, being good at letting people work when they want, and the home working piece has been popular. So I think that there probably are some positives there. I accept that the gig economy is something quite different. Restoring trust, then. So one of the lessons that this whole sector learned after 2010 was that people really needed to speak throughout the crisis, but they knew when they were communicating with somebody like them that actually they could trust them. So a lot of organisations using their frontline operators to rebuild trust. What's your thoughts on that?
I would say be aware of the fact that the people that you're talking to aren't just angry, they're feeling fragile. Right? I'm very fond of this word because I think it describes the way that we have built society. It's not robust to shocks. One single shock can send a family over the edge, whether it's into despair, whether it's into drug addiction, whether it's homelessness. There's very little in the way of financial and other cushions. So people feel tense, they feel fraught, and they increasingly feel that they don't hold any of the cards. So basically just engaging with people in such a way that recognizes that they feel fragile, that they feel vulnerable, and then making them feel in a genuine way that I'm listening. I actually get what you're talking about. I'm on your side. My job is to help you get to a better place to solve your problem. That is how to approach people in this moment, because it's that feeling of felt uncertainty and lack of control that if you're on a call line and someone says, "Hi, I'll be pleased to not solve your problem. Please hold for 20 minutes while I drive you insane," that's not going to go down well.
Yeah. So you think building trust, investing in helping customers who are fragile, vulnerable, I suppose the big word is vulnerability, isn't it? Is vulnerability doesn't really do it for you? You think fragile is the word we should be using?
I mean, I'm not fussy, whichever one you like, right? But I mean, essentially it's pointing in the same direction. This isn't sort of like happy time where everybody's really confident about the future and feels that their lives are getting better and the lives of their children are going to get better. For many people, the majority of people in the United Kingdom, when you survey them, they do not feel this way. So then, if you're providing them a service and they think that service is in many cases expensive and they're cash strapped, don't expect them to be grateful when they call. So the question is, how do you best interface with that? And to me, the best thing to do is humility and listening.
Your own personal side, are you somebody who likes automation? Do you like doing your own stuff, or do you like speaking to people? What's your preference?
Good question. It depends on the people. I mean, there's some people I really don't want to speak to. So I'd like to automate them as much as possible. Automation's always an augmentation, right? At the end of the day, a fully sort of cybernetic system, a fully algorithmic system is horrible. Like, nobody speaks to Siri, right? I mean, if you literally phone up Siri and have a chat, you need help, right? So all technologies are augmentation of what humans want to do. And that's the way that they should be treated. Once they become sort of standalone substitute for human interaction, you're building yourself something that's going to blow up in your face, because people do not react well to that.
That's a really good point, actually. I mean, in this whole industry, we talk about blended, we talk about automation, and we look at robotics, we look at everything to take the heavy load, to let humans be more human. I mean, that is the ultimate goal, so that, just as you say, when you speak to somebody, you're speaking to somebody who really understands what it is, and they've got the time to explore with you and take their time. And that brings me really to another issue, which is, to what extent should big corporates and brands, not even huge ones, but, you know, mainstream brands, take on the role of solving the society's ills, if you like? So if people are lonely and confused and don't have a lot of people to speak to, and maybe the only person to speak to is the driver that drops off a parcel or whatever, and then they might use some helplines, to what extent in this sort of new world, this new world that we're going into, should organisations take on that role? So it's outside of their sphere. So my job is to sell you or look after your money, to give you an insurance policy. What do you think in the future? Is the role also to understand social ills and help to reduce fragility?
I think it is, in terms of, if you actually want your workforce to thrive, right? If you want to have a good company, it's not about, like, you know, let's when we used to have parties, have your annual big piss up party and pretend that everything else is fine, right? You essentially are managing talent. And if you're serious about the words that get used in these industries, about how all of your talent is human and you're people-centered, etc., well, that starts with the well-being of your own workforce. If they're under the cosh, if they're not feeling the love, then don't expect them to reciprocate it back. It's really straightforward. Is it the job of firms to basically tackle all society's ills? No, absolutely not. But if they basically produce healthy environments where people actually want to show up to work and do the work, then they've already done their bit. But when they renege on that, and every firm is trying to cut costs and do exactly the thing to maximize profits and care about shareholders and nothing else, then guess what? You end up with a very embittered workforce in a highly sort of polarized society, which is where we've gotten to.
Yeah, it's good. We've talked a lot, actually, at last year's convention. We heard some examples of some organisations who actually actively empower their staff to give away some freebies to people in need and in the energy market, etc., etc. And, you know, I think that there was a move, I think, at that stage, and that was last November, which seems a long, long way back, to actually address just that point. And I think somebody at Davos last year, I can't remember who it was, somebody mentioned about, you know, a whole new, it's no longer corporate social responsibility, it's socially responsible companies. So, you know, is that move? And I wonder, post-pandemic, will we see a bigger move? Is that a hope, or is it a bit of a fantasy? Do you think companies will move like that, or will they be governed too much by the need to reduce costs?
Well, I mean, apart from the fact that your source came from Davos, which basically is the world's biggest bullshit factory, as far as I can figure out, it doesn't do anything apart from talk about technology that doesn't exist and how we're all going to be empowered and all this nonsense. I think the point is well taken, in that at the end of the day, what are corporations? Corporations, particularly in the American space, are legal persons. And that means that you get certain rights, but with those rights come responsibilities. And if you think that your responsibility, like most corporations in the US, is to pay as little tax as possible and to use tax optimization as one of your main profit vehicles, and then to basically financialize the inside of your company so that you become incredibly fragile to shocks. So when there's a pandemic, you need a bailout from the taxpayer. You're not doing the right thing, and you know it. You may be enriching the C-suite, but you know, you can keep that going for a while, but eventually that little party is going to crash. So if you want to be a responsible corporation, never mind socially responsible, you got to look after more than the bottom line. You got to look after your talent, and you got to think about what is your contribution to the wider society.
Yeah, interesting. What about your thoughts about sort of future then, in terms of the kind of service that people should be offered? I mean, do you think it is for those who are able? I mean, digital technology is amazing. We all know that. But in the future, there is predicted to be so much more done in an automated way and so much less done human to human. What's your thoughts on that? Could that work? You know, what would be the factors that would make it work, or do you think that's just something that's just never going to work?
I think a lot of that is Silicon Valley talking their book to bid up their share price with products they haven't invented yet, to be perfectly honest. The fastest growing job in the United States, and has been for 10 years, is elder care nurse. The Japanese tried to invent a robot for that. It didn't work, and they hate everyone else. So, you know, if it was going to work anywhere, it would have worked there. So your next fastest growing job is short order cook. I guess you can automate that. The one that's really going to get automated, which I think is pretty hilarious, is computer programmer. Because what AI and machine learning enables software to do is to replicate software. So all these people who are sending their kids now to coding camp and destroying their summers and any athletic prowess they may develop as a teenager, thanks, because the skill they're learning is going to be pretty much redundant in 10 years. So yeah, there's going to be massive changes, but not in the sectors that we think. Most of what we do now is we don't make things for each other. We swap services with each other. And those services are literally, in many cases, touch. You don't touch with a robot. You don't touch with an algorithm.
Yeah, no, it's just, that's true. Yeah, I mean, there's this saying, I don't know whether you agree with it, that we don't even know what jobs will exist. So most of the jobs that exist, a lot of the new jobs today, we didn't know about in 10 years' time.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's absolutely right. If you just said web programmer in 1985, nobody would, what are you talking about? Of course, like, you know, 1/3 of all jobs basically change by some estimates every 12 years. So that's absolutely the case. But here's something else that's absolutely the case. All of our societies are getting older, right? And Alzheimer and Parkinson's are becoming chronic diseases, which we have no treatments for that are effective. So you're going to have an awful lot of people looking after an awful lot of old people who can't look after themselves. I'm sure there are some technological augmentations you can do for that, but when 20% of your budget's going to be spent on that, it's going to be a lot of moving people around beds.
Yeah. And in terms of another big piece that's been talked about and we talked about through our conference and through our various sessions, this whole notion that if everybody's working at home and predicted to be for quite some time, regardless of the great news about vaccines that's coming along, let's just assume that a lot of people will continue home working because it works for them. It does it. Does that therefore mean that companies can and will globally source, and actually you won't need so many people round about your organisation, or location won't be a factor? Will we see more of that? And what do you think is in reality, or is it rhetoric at the moment?
Well, there's certainly some signs of this, and some industries have been doing this for years. I mean, the back office of Wall Street is effectively run out of large parts of India, right? So in a sense, there's nothing new in that. That's been going on for quite some time. The question is, what are the limits? What are the limits to doing this, right? So let's think about the United States just now. You have half the country that is furious with foreigners, amongst other things, and hates racial difference, and effectively sort of is doubling down on a kind of white nostalgia. If you give them a call center in a foreign country, how do you think they're going to react? Right? So, maybe there are limits. Let's say that you run a firm and you're going to, well, I can get a lot of people who are a lot cheaper to do this somewhere else. So you outsource to Romania, very good for computers, right? Very, very good skilled workers, fraction of the price. But then you've got these kind of supply chain issues, if you will, digital supply chains. You've got time zone issues. You don't actually know any of the workers. You never hired them. You're doing the whole thing on a contract. What happens if basically they're running what con artists call a long firm, right? So basically you take the book, they come in, they give you the work's amazing, it's half the price, you double it, you give them more, they do it again, you double it again, do it again, and boom, then they just disappear. What's your recourse? How are you going to find them? How are you going to find the 7 million you just shipped them? Right? There's a reason that we keep things close to home, because we can monitor them. So there's reward, but there's also risk. There's nothing new in that.
Yeah. No, we've seen a lot of global outsourcing over the last 10 years, absolutely. But we're now also seeing a bit of protectionism, probably a little bit due to borders shutting around pandemics. So if we make the assumption that perhaps this virus may, looking at half empty, might have other viruses, in a funny way, technology's made the world smaller, but the pandemic has made it bigger again. Is that something you'd agree with, or?
Well, I think about it this way. Think about China's reaction. So China's basically been getting dumped on by the US during the Trump administration. It's done a bunch of stuff that hasn't helped itself in terms of its image internationally. And it has built a giant firewall of connectivity to keep things out, not to integrate. So you can use these technologies to separate as well as to connect. The assumption, the kind of like the Davos assumption, if you will, we're all connected and we're all on a level playing field and it's changed everything, has always been bullshit. And I think we're beginning to see this now, that basically the recognition is that if a huge part of my profits come from particular intellectual property rights, and I know that there are foreign agents or foreign firms out there trying to steal my IPR, which basically means my profit model can disappear overnight, then I'm going to be very, very protective about my tech. I'm not going to be putting that out there for people to find, and I'm going to want high-scale protections for doing that. So with that coming together comes a necessary coming apart.
Okay, so in this new world then, when people are busy homeworking, do they need management?
That's a really great question. And it kind of builds on the last thing we were talking about. So imagine that you've decided that you've got your local firm and people are working from home and they're all doing great. And they actually have these horizontal connections whereby they start talking to each other through Zoom and they basically bypass the management function and they get their stuff done. There's a big question of redundancy. But let's say that you take that and you go, right, what we're going to do is we're going to dump that all in Romania or Estonia or whatever it is, right? Then you need management because you're going to have to monitor all those people that you don't know. So what happens is I think the management gets reconfigured, right? It's not as if it disappears as a function. It's just that you're going to discover a lot of things that you thought you needed to be on top of, you really don't, which actually then frees you up to really take care of other things that you need to take care of because the world has changed. But what it also shows is that seniority is no predictor of security, right? You can find yourself redundant because your underlings figure out how to do stuff without you. There's a very famous case of this back in 1974. Volvo had a plant in Sweden. I think it was called Uddevalla or something like this. And they basically organized the workers into teams. And they basically took out the production line and said, just do teams, like just figure out how to build a car and do it your way. And it did. It worked. I mean, was it as efficient as the line? No, but it did work. And of course, what this did was freak management out because it basically said, hell, I get paid a lot of money for supervising these guys. What if they don't need supervision? Well, you know, that's still an open question.
Yeah, big one for, I think, organisations throughout every sector, actually, just about the role. And of course,
well, think about it. If you're coming out of a pandemic, you've burned through a ton of cash. You've got a recovery. It's a good recovery, and you've got an opportunity to rebuild, right? Do you do what we usually do, which is throw the cheapest worker under the bus and try and automate, or does that hit a wall? Or do you basically look at your below C-suite to C-suite level and say, who are we paying a ton of money to, and what do they actually do?
Yeah, interesting thoughts. And of course, perhaps one of the conversation points is the role of management maybe is not so much about visual, you know, walking the floor, about spreadsheets, about telling people what to do. Maybe it needs to be more about well-being. It needs to be more about coaching. It needs to be more about adding value to that person, taking away a bit of the load. And I think that's certainly some of the pluses in our sector we're seeing just now. In fact, that to be honest with you, that was happening before pandemic. People realised this role of first-line manager is about support, because there's so many in this whole world. People dealing with customers often are the most skilled people in an organisation, but they never really get that recognition. They're now getting that recognition. So I think this.
You see this very much in financial firms. Financial firms are, of course, filled with quants. Quants come from engineering backgrounds. Engineers are notorious for being bad people. So when they get put into management, they're terrible at it, and basically they make everyone angry and annoyed. Really good people tend not to have those skills. So they don't get promoted into those positions because they haven't come up the hard way in that sense. And a lot of what management education does is essentially deprogram engineers and turn them into humans. So if you can start off with humans, you save yourself a step.
I'm sure our audience are going to love that. Mark,
I'm sure there's an engineer in your audience going,
it may well be. They pop up everywhere, or accountants, or whoever. Mark, we could talk all day on this book. I just want to leave you with. I want to leave the audience with a few. Why should they read it? What are they going to learn from the book, from Angronomics? What will it help them understand? Do you think, if you're trying to reshape things?
It's everything. All right. No, Eric and I sat down and decided we were going to write a book that was for normal people, because we've both written enough book for specialists and academics. And we recorded the book. We did it as a dialogue. The book is actually written as a dialogue. And we took it and we turned it into normal text and read it. And it was horrible, because it just sounded exactly what it was, which was like two superannuated 50-year-old white guys setting the world to rights. So we put it back into a dialogue and made it basically about disagreement, about the origins of populism and why economic doesn't work and why big economic crashes produce anger and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, it's a rip-roaring good read. Basically, give me 3 hours, sit on a plane when we get to fly again, and then read it. You can get through the whole thing in 3 hours, and you'll learn a ton of stuff. So I think you should do that.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll be certainly promoting and making it available to those who wish. So anyway, I'd like to say thanks to Mark, and hopefully we can chat again soon, and hopefully the world will become less angry. And
Exactly. And hopefully next time we will do this face-to-face. And I can hold a copy of my Angrynomics book and ask how many of you bought this. And we'll go from there.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mark. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
And it is a rip-roaring good read. It's the kind of book that I'll dip into probably over and over and over again. But one of the main points that Mark made there really was, I suppose, about putting the human first, you know, hiring the human. It's what he said about hiring an engineer and then trying to make them into a human really does resound with me. And my motto has always been people before processes. As you will probably notice, Anne-Marie is here with me. Anne-Marie, you seem to enjoy that discussion. And I have to say, one of the lines that will stick with me for a long time to come is Davos is the biggest BS factory in the world. Apologies, I think, to anybody who loves being in Davos year on year. You know, so I think Mark has a real knack for telling it how it is. What did you take away from that conversation?
Exactly like you, I really enjoyed interviewing Mark. He really brought a breath of fresh air to this whole debate, actually, because we've been talking digital, we've been slightly talking process. Everybody's been in ops land, everybody's been worrying about getting stuff set up, and that's been the mainstay of conversation. And he just hit it home, really, that, you know, at the end of the day, if we don't trust in our companies, if we don't trust in the people who are leading us, if we don't trust, it's just a lot of it's a waste of time. And so we have to really drill down to become human. So I loved all that piece, and I love the Davos comment as well. I thought that was very, very funny.
Funny how things stick in your head for years to come. But we've been having these kind of conversations all year at CCA. You know, we've invited industry leaders along to virtual meetings. We've talked about vulnerability. We've talked about well-being. We've talked about mental health. We've talked about the importance of our people and looking after our people in these kind of circumstances. And we've talked about self-care, because let's face it, if we don't look after ourselves, we're not going to be there with the ability and capacity to look after the people who depend on us to do that. But one of the biggest successes, I think, has been the women in leadership groups. And I know that there was one last week, which went really, really well. And certainly, I know you were extolling the virtues of all of that when we talked last week. What is it about that group or about these groups that's really cutting through, that's really, I suppose, just being open and honest and sharing?
So since the beginning of the pandemic, we've had many, many more conversations and many, many more sessions with lots of different groups than probably we've ever had in the physical world. And I have to say, at the beginning of all of this, I was worried that we might lose a bit of engagement because I couldn't quite see how it would all work. So for us as an organisation, we've just gone into the mode of, you know, there's something on every day. There's a group session on every day for something. And as you say there, the women in leadership thing, it's a very frank, honest, open debate with some amazing leaders who are very honest. And so, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we talk about, just last week, we had some points, which I know we're going to hear just in a little while. We're going to do some clips of it. But some of the things that stand out for me are fun. We go to work often to have fun. We might not realise it, but we have fun when we're at work. And a lot of us are missing that. We're not quite sure what we're missing, but we're missing the fun. So we try and manufacture the fun. We try through quizzes and all these kind of things. And all these are great at times. But again, the points that were made through the conversations we had last week were that you have to be careful not to manufacture fun. And you also have to be careful if people are really tired working in this way all the time in front of screens, that you don't add more work so fun doesn't become more work. So that was a really important point.
I think that's the danger, though, is it not, that people feel obliged to come along to the fun events as well as coming along to the work events. And I am beginning to hear people more often saying, oh, I really would just like to shut the computer down and be with my family. And I don't really want to have to engage with my colleagues in something that is supposed to be a fun event, but is beginning to wear thin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly younger members of staff who are not so experienced and perhaps worried about their jobs and worried if they don't turn up to something that's prescribed, then they might be disadvantaged against perhaps more experienced people. They don't have the experience to be able to say no, in other words. So I think that there's a lot of that going on. Another point that was made, and it's related to that really, is you have to be very careful. Everybody's showing concern, which is absolutely vital in these days when so many people are suffering and worrying. But you have to be careful how you show the concern, because if you raise concern, it might be misinterpreted without the body language as to you're not doing your job properly. I'm worried about the way that you are. So you have to, again, be really careful that how you express concern. So that's another piece that came out very valuable lesson actually around concern. Oh, right.
Yeah, well, it is about, I suppose, about how you communicate these things as well as what you're saying, isn't it? So, you know, it's very easy to tip over into that point where it feels intrusive. You know, why are you constantly asking me if I'm okay? Am I doing something wrong?
You know, that's one of the biggest conversation pieces that lots of people are having just now and really struggling with, is that, so you've been told, just as you say, by the organisation to constantly check that people are okay. Don't miss people out. Just because they're not visible doesn't mean that, you know, that they're not struggling, or just because they haven't voiced a concern doesn't mean they don't have one. And at the other end of it, you've got people who are saying, I don't want you to be asking me this all the time. I'm getting really fed up with it. Stop it. I don't need you to be doing it. So if you're, again, this is going back to experience. If you're an experienced manager, you might understand that. You've learned it over the years. If you're not so experienced, it's a very difficult thing. And another point that came up, which I think, again, really important, is that a lot of customers now, we're all customers, we're kind of expecting things to be back to normal. We don't really like hearing because of COVID. We're kind of getting fed up with because of COVID, particularly if we're doing our jobs and have been back to normal and many people have not stopped working, then they don't want in their lives to be constantly met with it, whether it's through councils or through companies or whoever it is that's giving them that message. But at the same time, the people who are delivering those services, the managers, have got to balance concern and challenge. So, and that is probably one of the most difficult things to do. So I need you to be performing because I need us to get back to normal, but I also need to care for you because I know we're going through difficult times. So that piece, and doing it digitally, when you're not really in front of the person, you're picking up all the nuances, the cues, the things that you normally make the full picture. So there's a piece. And related to that, visibility. Quite a lot of the people that I speak to, the managers, are saying, they're now saying to people, please don't switch off the videos. We know we're all getting a bit fed up with this. Don't switch off your cameras because we need to see you. We need to try and be part of this if we're having a group session. So lots and lots of tips around fun and vulnerability, visibility, concern versus challenge. These are just some of the bigger things that rise to the top. And I think another piece that for me was really important was a self-moderation piece. So when you're with people all the time, you moderate your behaviour to suit groups of people. When you're on your own, you get a little bit lost. And we heard quite a few people say that they almost have to talk to themselves to say, am I who I think I am today? Because you've not got your group around about you telling you, and sort of rubbing the sides off. So that was an interesting piece as well.
But that's very important. I mean, you and I talk to the dog. Because that's the only creature that there is around most of the day, lying at our feet. Unfortunately, you don't get the same affirmation from them. But just to pick up on that point about the visibility, I mean, I've noticed that more and more and more people are turning off their cameras. Is it just about not wanting to be seen, wanting to shrink into the background, not wanting to be called upon, or is it about having other things that you'd rather get on with? Is it if you have got your camera switched off, you can get on with your emails. There's other work to be done. Are we trying to almost say, hang on a minute, there's too many meetings going on here. We have work to do. Absolutely.
I think all of these things actually, and also these are quite artificial settings, and a lot of people are just fed up looking at, looking the part on video, because it's quite stressful. You don't do your normal things. You don't try not to touch your hair too much or move around too much, all these kind of things that you do in a normal physical setting. So there are real challenges. A lot of people are reporting, I think somebody last week told me that they had their first case of Zoom burnout as a reason for being absent. Actually, rather than a physical thing and not coming into work, Zoom burnout, I won't be on today. I thought that was really interesting. And I know you can laugh at it, but actually we all know when we're doing this stuff day and daily, it is absolutely exhausting. It is exhausting.
I am not laughing at it at all. And don't forget, of course, it's a few months now since the World Health Organization officially recognized burnout, not necessarily Zoom burnout, but burnout as a reason for people being ill and not able to work. And I can't see why Zoom would be any different. Or, of course, there are lots of other video conferencing platforms that we could use, but I can perfectly see why you've got to be on all the time. You've got to be absolutely careful about your body language. The number of people I've seen rolling their eyes in meetings where normally it wouldn't be noticed. It's terribly visual on screen. Body language can be such a giveaway. So people are beginning to learn all of that, as well as the fact that they are in the middle of a meeting, and it's exhausting, as you said, utterly exhausting.
Absolutely. And so for me, this is a big experiment. And we've been in, it's a long experiment. We've been here since March, and many of us wouldn't have expected to be here quite so long. However, I think for me, the really critical thing is the learnings. I feel that just as a big organisation listens, it's got loads of ways of listening to conversations and decides what to listen to, what to prioritise to make decisions. At CCA, we've had so many interactions since March with so many amazing people, actually groups and individuals and companies that we've never spoken to before, and all sorts. And what we've tried to do is just to pull all of that together. And that's actually led to the creation of Inspire, for example, which is absolutely geared at first line managers. It's a brilliant programme. It runs, you can join, next one I think starting off in January, a session for leaders, and it's no nonsense, practical help and support to let them understand their role, their responsibility, and absolutely hammer home how responsible they are for a lot of people's lives. And it's a big undertaking, actually, and I'm sure it's something I'm not sure we all get, actually, but even when you're on a digital platform, that responsibility is huge. So we're working with all these pieces, trying to recreate what we do at CCA to reflect these needs. So we're having to do more and more, but we have to make sure it absolutely hits the bullseye, because people don't have time now to do things that are not relevant to them. They really don't have time. That's something that's coming back to us in spades.
I fully understand that as well. You mentioned humility there. That's back to Mark's book, where he's talked about humility and listening, and we do have to listen to what the clients need as much as anything else. Now, you mentioned the Inspire program, which is great. Another thing that you have changed, that we have changed, I can claim to be CCA too, I'm a director, but we have changed the assessments for accreditation, and that has been hugely successful too. And the other thing that you are changing is the awards ceremony. Can you mention just both of those before I go on to the break in the industry debate?
Yeah, so the assessments against global standard have always been physical, people going in and going into centres and operations globally to find out what's going on. We moved those, obviously we had to move them digitally, and I have to say, we almost are asking ourselves a question now, why didn't we do this before? Because we can speak to so many more people, you can bring in teams globally, we can have brilliant interactions, there can be really good learning opportunities. So those are working really, really well, and we're delighted with the progress of them. And particularly for organisations who are working a little bit home working, some in the office, it's given them a great chance to bring it all together and share all the learning. So we're really delighted about that. And similarly with the awards programme, lots of people have entered into the awards, so good luck to everyone who's entered. And we're going to be looking at those in March, and we're learning from lots of other ceremonies. I'm glad ours is a little bit later because we'll avoid some of the mistakes and hopefully learn some of the benefits. So we're really looking forward to that.
Well, you know what they say about flattery. Yes, let's take everything we can learn and, repeat what other people have done really well and avoid the pitfalls. Yes, so all of that's coming up. There will be lots more information on all of those things that Anne-Marie has mentioned, all of the CC events that are coming up in 2021. Obviously, we'll be able to give you all the information should you want that in over the next few months. Anne-Marie, thank you very much. We'll talk to you later as conference goes on. Time for a break. Put the kettle on, then mug in hand, return as quickly as you can, and we will launch the industry debate.
We forgot the clips.
Well, there is a bit, I know.
It occurred to me that having spent a lot of my career working a lot on the importance of staff engagement, really knowing your people and knowing them on sort of individual, team and corporate level, that isn't something that I've actually seen happen anywhere systematically in the last 6 months of the places I've been working with. It's anecdotal and all of that's kind of really good, but I think probably in order to get to that next stage, it's really helpful to do some staff engagement that's a bit more tailored around the world that we're in right now, and have a look at what that tells us, because I think with an organizational development background, I think it's going to tell us a whole load of stuff, and the people who get on the front foot with that are going to be the ones who find success fastest.
A huge learn for us around wellbeing, especially, is our leadership. Team leaders have become virtual leaders. They've not seen some of their teams for months. So how do you keep that engagement and keep your coaching up, keep your one-to-ones up, despite not being there physically? What does that mean for our recruitment? I'm really excited that I'm going to have my first permanent virtual team leader with half a team in Belfast, half a team in Manchester. But what does that mean for us in the future? And then how does that's going to become a permanent thing. So how do they focus on well-being within their team?
And I would say as well, just as a playing slight devil's advocate, just keep top of mind things like the walking challenges. I have a couple of people in my team with specific physical disabilities, and that would certainly make them feel potentially a little bit excluded or a bit stressed at the fact that they couldn't necessarily do that. So it might be worth thinking about mixing that up a little bit, because we certainly do that with the team, where we empower them to come up with some of the more fun ideas, so that we can make sure that we have that feeling of inclusivity.
So we've really started to focus on our employee experience programme. So previously we would have had lots of activity in customer experience, but that's very much been shifted to focus on employee experience, rolling out lots of different wellbeing sessions across the business, online jam sessions that we've been having with a lot of the leadership team. And that's just sort of coincided with our annual sort of employee surveys. So making sure that we are getting real insight on the back of that directly to the leadership team. We're also doing a lot to try and invest in our people. So I think others had mentioned around that sort of supporting our home workers. So we are now moved to about 50% of our staff population to working from home. So a huge piece of work there in terms of offering up equipment, making sure people have the right desks, right monitors, etc. at home, to make sure everyone has, the kit that they need.
The calls have been incredibly tough. Our service user group is incredibly vulnerable at the best of times, and this is far from being the best of times. So they, people with dementia and their carers have really struggled with the loss of groups and face-to-face services and the difficulties of getting support in place, not being able to get diagnoses, and all of that, stress and anxiety and fear and distress gets put onto the advisors, who then kind of have to find somewhere to put it themselves. So wellbeing is going to continue being a big focus for us.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for all of those comments. I got a bit ahead of myself and announced the break before we managed to fit in the clips. My apologies. But now it really is time for that break. So grab yourself a mug of coffee and we'll see you back here at 11:10. Thank you. Welcome back, and thank you very much indeed for rejoining the first morning of Annual Convention 2020, and it's time for the industry debate. Now, what impact has the pandemic had on organisations across the globe? Are there any clear winners in the fight to control the pandemic and its impact on businesses, the economy, and workers, as well as on health? Or are the issues and challenges the same, regardless of the response and restrictions put in place by different governments? So the debate is about giving us a global perspective. Anne-Marie Forsyth is in the chair with Ian Banks, Group Vice President of TTEC, Richard Kenny, Senior Product Manager, Marketing Manager, Poly, and Martin King, who is General Manager of Customer Vulnerability at the Bank of New Zealand. Now, as the debate is running, we'd love it if you have any questions, if you'd put them on the chat, and I will do my best to gather up a couple of those questions at least, because we hope to have some time to ask Richard and Ian some questions at the end of the debate. In the meantime, it's over to Anne-Marie Forsyth with the panel.
I'm delighted to be joined today by a group of experts who are going to help us understand how the global pandemic has been affecting customer experience in different parts of the world. And we're going to have a chat about just what different people strategies are working and kind of things we're going to carry forward with us post-pandemic, the learnings we're not going to lose. I'm joined today by Ian Banks, who's Group Vice President of TTEC, Richard Kenny, who's a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Poly, and by Martin King, who's the GM Customer Vulnerability in Bank of New Zealand. So welcome to everyone. I'm going to just hand over now to each of our panellists to say a little word about themselves and just to give us an idea of how the pandemic has been influencing and has been affecting them and their teams so far as we're entering this stage now, which has gone on, let's be honest, for a little bit longer than any of us would have expected. So I'm going to turn now, first of all, to Martin, who's in New Zealand. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Good evening, good morning. So Martin King, I'm as you said, the GM of Customer Vulnerability at the Bank of New Zealand. So I've actually been at the Bank of New Zealand for a year this Friday, having spent 20 years in financial services in the UK. So I think it's actually probably been the craziest year of my own life on a personal basis, having seen the respective reactions both in the UK and in New Zealand. So what would I say we've seen very differently? We have had one of the strictest regimes around the world around lockdowns. We had nobody working at home really in the Bank of New Zealand, and then overnight we went to 95% of people working at home. And if you couldn't work at home, you weren't allowed in the office. So quite an extreme example. And actually we've seen both our customers react in a certain way, our colleagues react, and then we've had a series of rolling lockdowns ever since. So there's this real nervousness we've seen from our colleagues around how they return back to work. Do they want to return back to work? How do you do that in a really supportive way? So I think there's a lot of things we've learned around not only our customer behaviour, but also our colleague behaviour and how they cope with the resilience and what do we ask them to do, the kind of calls they're dealing with. And I think working in a bank in this environment, people are going through a lot of heartache themselves in their personal lives and dealing with mortgage deferrals and such like. So I think it's been a real year of learning of making decisions not because you want to make them quicker, you don't have a choice to make them quicker either.
Thanks for that, Martin. Richard?
Okay, so I'm Richard Kenny. I am part of the global marketing team at Poly. I've been here around 20 years now. Poly is the combination of Plantronics and Polycom. And for most of that 20 years, I've been involved in the call center business. So fairly good experience. But as a company ourselves, actually, the last year has more cemented our position rather than really changed it. We've always been a company that's had an early adoption approach when it comes to technology. So we've had collaboration systems, we've had video systems, etc., that have enabled us to work globally. But prior to the pandemic, we've always had the safety net of an office, and we've really sort of made that office a big showcase for us. But the last year has been really, okay, take away that safety net. Can we be a fully virtual company? We've obviously closed down all of our global offices in line with regulations. I've been working at home since November last year. So it's really kind of cemented the policies, the procedures, and the approaches that we take as a company. And yes, we've shown that we can work, but that was a pretty seamless step for us to get everybody working from home. But it's now taking those really hard details now. Okay, can we do full cycle recruiting, advertising, onboarding, and maybe sort of retiring people remotely completely now? That's been the sort of really big learning process for us, is almost going to a fully digital, fully remote company.
Okay, thanks for that. And Ian?
Thanks, Anne-Marie. As Anne-Marie said, I'm the Group Vice President for TTEC. I've been with TTEC for just over 3.5 years, but in the CX industry globally for over 20 years. And similar to what Richard and Martin have said, for TTEC, with having over 50,000 employees around the world, to then mobilise and move to an at-home environment globally was a monumental shift for us. In the space of 2 weeks, we got over 38,000 of those employees to an at-home environment in some regions where it was difficult to do because of infrastructure, etc. So we have seen a real shift in now. Don't like using the phrase, but it's become the new norm of working at home. And how do you operate? Because operating at an at-home environment from a contact center perspective is very different to operating at a brick and mortar traditional office environment. So I think what was really been important is how we've been looking at the employee experience, because a happy employee is always going to deliver a great service to the customer. So we've really been focusing on the opportunities of developing the right culture at an at-home environment, but also looking at mental health and how we can support colleagues during this difficult time as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, there's definite recurring themes, aren't there? It's about the very rapid mobilisation. We've just read so much about it. And I wonder, for example, we've all, all of us probably been used to working at home, being fairly mobile. Well, not so much Martin, because you're in New Zealand and you can't leave New Zealand. But for most of us, it's been a travelling around time, and the working at home is pretty normal. But for frontline teams, as you said, it's quite a difficult challenge. Again, reflecting, we've been trying to change this. We've been trying to sort of innovate around better ways of delivering customer experience. And the thought was, before this pandemic, that we really ought to have many more experienced people dealing end-to-end with customers, perhaps not so shackled in sort of command and control structures. And I just wonder, do you see the opportunities moving forward? Do you see this as an opportunity to reinvent? Martin?
The short answer is yes. And I think it was actually challenges. So as a bank, we have around about 150 branches across New Zealand for frontline face-to-face interactions. And thankfully, they're all open at the moment and have operated at various different levels. But yet, customer behaviour has changed as well. So how do you use a workforce that was predominantly customer-facing, dealing with people on a face-to-face basis that aren't being utilised, whilst we've actually seen in our contact centres a rapid increase in customer interactions. So actually, I won't go into the local branch, I will call them. So we are now actually thinking about how do you have a flexible workforce, which is across the country like New Zealand, which in population size is relatively small, 5 million, but actually is bigger than the UK. So you've got big spread out geographical splits, you've got lots of regional places, and regional employment markets that were normally based on the 3 big cities. So I think actually we've seen a big shift towards how do we use the whole of our workforce rather than relying on you either in a call centre or you're frontline and face-to-face. And I think actually by giving people that freedom as well, we've also seen as you give some people freedom, some people cope very well with that freedom. Work at home, the technology works great. We've also got a lot of people that actually have big, large families, have been doing the home learning, so actually it's a very unhelpful, unproductive environment. And actually trying to work out what suits best and think about what you ask them to do based on their environment rather than necessarily their core skills of what they could do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, interesting. Richard?
Yeah, I kind of, I feel like the words are being taken out of my mouth there by Martin. But I kind of feel like one of the things we haven't been particularly good at as an industry in the past is treating people as individuals, both employees and customers. And what this sudden rapid change has forced a lot of people to do globally is suddenly look and say, actually, I can't treat my employee workforce as one. There are certain people that cannot work from home. They just do not have the physical workspace to do it. They physically don't have a broadband connection. I've got people who want to come into the office because they can't handle technology. So we've kind of suddenly got to go from, we've got big teams globally that we all treat the same into treating those people as individuals and looking at people's needs individually. And it's also forced us to do the same for customers. We've had all these processes that have seamlessly worked over the past couple of years. We've had, minor incremental changes that we've made. Then suddenly we've had to make a big change. And it's again forced us to look at what channels do customers really do want to talk to us on? What channels do customers really need? What channels work and what interactions work? So like you said, Martin, you don't go into a bank face to face anymore. You probably have a phone call with them or even a video call with them. So I think it's forced a sort of really reinvention by looking at customers and employees on an individual basis rather than a sort of big wide level base.
Ian?
Yeah, I would add just a couple of points to what Richard and Martin have said. Is what we've seen is both within TTEC but also within the partners that we work with is organisations have become braver at making decisions now. And some of those decisions have been forced upon them. As I said, if you had asked our executive committee, would we be able to get 44,000 people to working at home? The answer would have been no. Everyone had talked about work at home, but never really taken that massive leap forward. So I think what it's done is it's accelerated this environment that probably was going to happen, but not for a few years yet. But what is really important is because we are in the midst of this digital revolution where customers look for accessibility anywhere, anytime, any channel now. And it's really important that that employee experience is mapped to the customer experience. I can't focus on that enough, and that you balance the digital offerings that organizations put forward with employee base that can now support that. But what it has done is it has allowed for organizations to be far more flexible in the type of profile of employee that they recruit for, but also the type of shift patterns. We see it now very predominantly coming through is when you were working in a brick and mortar, having a split shift was something that was never ever adopted. Now, split shifts are probably becoming more and more apparent and more predominant in our industry, which does provide a degree of flexibility both for the employees and for the customer base as well. So my summary would be it's allowed for braver decisions to be made quicker, and to be made putting the heart of the employee and the customer at everything.
And Ian, just one thing I noticed you talked about there was around customer behaviour and how you need to be more individual. We actually noticed in lockdown there was a government diktat that nobody over the age of 70 could leave their house in that initial lockdown, and clearly that creates a large scale vulnerability of people that have traditionally done things face to face. So we talk about Woodbury as a business that had 40,000 people. We actually had a line set up for the over 70s. And this was a line that if you were to put forward a business case that said, this is a line for a specific age group, that's the only demographic we're using. We have no limits on the average handling time. And our predominant there is just to help them through their servicing and get them online to do digital banking. It would never pass through any sort of business case or cost benefit analysis, but it was one of the single biggest successes of COVID because people were able to still gain access to their money. So I think it has not only changed the decision making, but also what decisions you'll make and how those decisions are created.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, I think back to Richard's point about individuals, treating people as individuals, treating customers as individuals and treating employees as individual is a really big area. But what do you think about the impact on management? I've certainly heard in lots of these sessions that I've been doing, many managers either at senior levels or even at one above. So your first line managers really struggling because they're not floor walking, they're not getting the fan base, if you like, put it like that. They're not, you know, they're not having that one-on-one the contact with teams. They're not having their sort of power. For some it works, for some it doesn't. Do you see this role of management totally changing in the future? So if you to think again, imagine we just didn't have this setup and we're starting now with this new setup. What would be the role of those managers?
So I'll chip in on the first go here. There's a couple of people we spoke to and said that when they did the big shift to home, like Ian said, in 2 weeks, their employees shifted home really seamlessly. It was the managers that struggled. And one of the things that we saw was that initially the managers would go through almost an emotional view of the call center first. They'd look at people, they'd pick up on body language, and then they would dig into statistics afterwards to sort of find out, okay, why is that person looking or acting differently? And those supervisors, those first line managers have now had to almost flip that approach. They've got to be heavily reliant on data to look at statistics, look at core performance, and pick that up first, and then go into the emotional reasons of why someone may not be performing. So that was one sort of key thing that we found within our base of how people have had to change on an immediate basis.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that the shift for employees was seamless. Management have struggled at the beginning. I think as this does become the normal practice, they are now starting to develop those at-home skills. But it's interesting, actually, I got told this 2 days ago. We had our first absence with a manager through what was called Zoom fatigue. So it's really interesting to see now that as the time goes on, how management use the technology to manage their employees is going to be so pivotal. And I think at the beginning, where videos were always on, this was a novelty. It's now at that place as how this is becoming the normal. How do we ensure we are giving the management the right tools, the right technologies, the right processes to enable them to be really successful in managing frontline ambassadors? The other part is, I was a team leader, and I remember my old boss said to me that the team leader are the cog of the contact center environment. They are the engine room. If they are not operating properly, it's going to be a real struggle. And from a team leader, you need that social interaction with your people. You need the touch, the feel, to really understand what's going on a day-to-day basis. Even sitting down with someone for 5 minutes and having that friendly conversation gets to know what's happening in their life. That's now different in this type of environment. And I think what we're going to start to see is the evolution of more online tutorials, more online management courses to give our management team the right skill set. Because, as I said in my introduction, managing an at-home operation is significantly different to managing a brick-and-mortar operation.
And just to lead on to that, I think we're in a slightly different position where we have actually started to return to the offices. So I was actually in the office today prior to joining this call. And what we are seeing, go back to your tactile point, is whilst people are working flexibly and we're operating about 60% capacity at any one time in our offices. If you're in, you're with your team. So if you are rotating in, if you're deciding what days of the week am I going to be in the office, actually people are choosing to be in with either their teams, their team managers. So I think there's been a real return back to, I like having that human interaction, whilst I think all the struggles that Richard and Ian have articulated definitely still exist. I think people are having to be, the trust levels are having to go up, and that's not necessarily been a skill that they've exercised for a long period. And I run the collections team, the complaints team here at Bank of New Zealand, and we have certainly seen not everybody return, but they return in their pods. And there's a real camaraderie when they are in the office. It's no different to when we were pre-lockdown, but they may not have all the other teams there as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Within our network, we have majority of organisations, and the stats speak for themselves, I think around 80% have now moved to home working, whereas before pandemic it was less than 20%. But critically, there are quite a lot of organisations who haven't been able to for lots of reasons, legacy reasons, whatever, or haven't needed to actually, or contractually haven't been allowed to. And there's an interesting piece of research around about the resilience there. Have people felt better just because they've been more kept normal? Or conversely, are they unhappy because others are getting the chance? So I think there's a lot of mileage left in this debate. Specifically on the management piece, I think it's fair to say that in terms of the inquiries we've been receiving at CCA, huge numbers of inquiries around how to manage remote teams. I mean, it's everybody's asking that same question. It is a difficulty without doubt, and so much so that we've actually developed a new piece around global standard, which I know some of you are very much aware of. And we are looking specifically at that role, the management role, to have a guideline help assessment service, which allows people to look at best practice across industry for how to manage best. I'm intrigued by Zoom fatigue. That's Zoom fatigue. I'm sure we will all have that at some stage in the future. So if we turn to, we've discussed, I think, the whole area about some people can't, some people can, about the difficulty, the mobilisation, fast decision making. What about the recruitment itself? If you were now starting to recruit again, are you going to be recruiting differently, and are you going to be recruiting more globally? Is that really something that will happen, where you'll recruit team leaders and maybe even colleagues from different parts? You're no longer stuck to your shackles of your locale, or is that something that's perhaps a bit further off? What's your views? Anybody?
I'll start with this one, if that's all right, Anne-Marie, because we've actually started to adopt that. If you look during the pandemic, actually TTEC has recruited over 10,000 employees during the pandemic because of the growth that we've seen. But if you also look at that, we have trialled a new form of recruiting with digital, using, whilst we sell our digital technology platforms, we also try to use our own digital technology platforms that we do. So recruiting has been completely different. Onboarding has been very different as well for employees. But we have tried to trial where we were, for example, and this is a real life example, managing a UK operation. So the frontline ambassadors were in the UK, but actually some managements were either in Athens in Greece or in Sofia in Bulgaria. So we actually have adopted that. Now, one part of that is language. So there clearly has to be a no language barrier to do it, but it has proven to be successful. And I think that's what this virtual world and this using cloud-based technology solutions allows us to do. It allows us to be creative. As I said at the beginning, we have become braver at making decisions. We've made mistakes. Absolutely, we've made mistakes. But certainly one of the success criteria that we have seen is, I think, as long from a frontline ambassador perspective, it's important that potentially for some customers they reside in the region that the customer is in. But from a management point of view, it's now opened up a significant management pool that potentially we were never able to tap into in the past. So I think there's a benefit that's come through it. But again, what you have, when you do that, you've then got to balance it from a cultural alignment perspective, because managing people who are in the UK is very different to managing people who are in Athens, who are in Bulgaria. There's different legislations, different cultures. And again, I said about onboarding, that's when it's become really important for us, is how we onboard that management team to ensure they embrace the culture of the region that they're going to be managing and the people that they're going to be managing. But so far, our results have been extremely encouraging from that point of view.
So big cultural challenges as well as technological challenges. So you're adding another layer of complexity, but hopefully to improve talent pool. Of course, it means that in the UK, then wherever you are, your existing talent pool is also open for poach by global players.
And that is, listen, it's competition, and competition is healthy within our industry. There is absolutely nothing wrong with competition. I think that's when it becomes important. We talk about the culture, we talk about enabling the management that we bring on board. It's so important that in this day and age, managing mental health and managing the employee experience is more prominent than managing payroll or than making sure that you've got the right remuneration package in place. And I think that's, from a TTEC perspective, that's something that I'm really proud of, the organisation, that what we've done to ensure that we have managed mental health. It's an extremely high focus area for us. and that we are providing the right environment for employees to be successful going forward.
Yeah, good. Richard?
I was going to make exactly the same point that you did, Anne-Marie, in that, okay, if we're thinking about recruiting globally, then all of our competitors are doing exactly the same. So we've actually got to put a fair bit more emphasis on keeping our own employees and looking after them. Those really good employees that deliver a fantastic customer experience. So it's going to be interesting to see what attrition rates do post-pandemic. Obviously, in the pandemic, they probably went, nobody was leaving, but it's going to be interesting to see what they do. So for us, though, we're kind of still focusing more on geographic hubs. So a couple of support centers in different locations globally. So whilst we will recruit around that sort of country, and there's no geographic limits on the country, we'll probably keep it within that country for now. Just sort of we're focusing on being able to bring people back to a hub for learning experiences, for social experiences as well. Because we found that's one of the big things that we've missed. We've been doing the home working for about 7 years now, including all of our call center teams. And that social and learning were the two big elements that were picked out in the early trials as something that really needed to be focused on. So rather than just say, let's go fully virtual because we can, let's go mostly virtual in a particular geographic region, but have the ability to come back as a hub for certain experiences.
Martin, you're locked down, you can't leave, but what does that do for your global recruitment?
Well, so I think it's actually, I probably find opposite issues to what Ian and Richard have talked about. So I think that they've been in New Zealand. Before I came here, you don't quite realise how far away it is from anywhere, but it's a good 4-hour flight before you hit land. So you get on a plane, it's like you're flying across the whole of Europe before you hit anything else. So, and I'm sat here and it's 13 hours ahead of where you guys are. So actually that creates a different problem around looking to other markets to support you, because actually they're either sleeping or waking up, and it's not particularly easy. So I think on a workforce strategy, we're limited on our influx. So we normally have a high turnover of immigration, skills. That's all turned off at the moment. What we are seeing is people switching industries. So having maybe been in an industry that's probably under more pressure, particularly the travel industry here in New Zealand, because there's not the ability to kind of get people on planes and go off on holidays. So we have actually seen our recruitment coming from industries that are actually struggling and moving into our own with the skills, with the knowledge, and bringing them on board. But I think actually the global recruitment pools can be quite tough when you are as isolated as we are in New Zealand. But we are also seeing a large amount of returning Kiwis. So it's one of the most sought after places in the world to head to at the moment. So we are seeing a large swathe from all over the world coming back in, bringing those cultural diversities and the learnings from other jurisdictions back home. So it's just, it's been an interesting 6 months of recruitment and people strategies.
Yeah, fascinating. What about sort of learnings then? I mean, we've talked a lot about different forms of people strategies and cultural differences. If you had to think about a few learnings that you really want to hold on to take forward, to the next phase, and ones you might have to fight for. I mean, I've been speaking to people recently who have been saying that they've just really relished the cutting down swathes of nonsense that sit between a good idea and it happening in large corporates and something not so large corporates. That's obviously one learning, but what sort of things we think, like, we definitely don't want this ever to go back, we want to keep this, and it's something that I know that I didn't know before, but I know now, and it's really precious, or alternatively just something you actually always knew but would like to keep. So anybody with some of those learnings for audience?
So I'll probably kick off with a couple, and I'll steal some of the really easy ones. So I think decision making, because I think what we have to, what I've said on the decision making, what we've done is we've seen people take a risk, not necessarily waiting for large scale permission, but actually asking for forgiveness later. So and it's actually worked through. So the passion and the environment of being locked down has really brought people together. So we focused on employee well-being, not just on the mental health, which we talk about a lot, but all the other human needs. And we've actually set up a employee financial assistance team to actually look at the finances of people. So it's one of the major causes of mental health, and actually we need to focus on that. So I think the focus on mental health, but also listening to your customers and seeing what they do and responding with out much evidence as you may have done in the past. So again, it comes back to that decision making.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add to what Richard said there, sorry, to what Martin said, in that for me and for TTEC, a key learning, we talked about recruitment, there's learnings in that, but actually the onboarding programme. Onboarding, whether it's frontline ambassadors or management, I've recruited a number of people within my team. Onboarding them in a virtual environment is extremely difficult. And in the contact centre industry, the first 90 days of employment is the key. If you can keep people if you can keep them happy during the first 90 days, then the stats show that their tenure with you is going to be extended. So that whole onboarding 90-day period, interacting with them, as I said, we've learned from some of our mistakes. We've created a new learning environment that has went digital. And the other point, and again, I think it is really important, and it was a great point I think Martin made there about the financial assistance, but certainly how we look at diversity, how we look at mental health and manage mental health on an ongoing basis. It is the most heavily talked about subject just now in our industry. And because, as you said, Anne-Marie, I don't think anyone expected us to be in this position 8-9 months ago. It's been a tough year. I think everyone can see it's been a really tough year. Whether you are a frontline ambassador, whether you're a CEO, it's been a tough year. And I think that's going to be an ongoing learning. It's an ongoing development program, how we ensure we are providing the right employee experience to ensure that the customer is happy as well.
Okay, thanks.
I think there's a really good point we can follow up on there, Ian, as well. Is one of the big learnings we've had is to celebrate people. Even if it's a small amount of, clapping on a Zoom call, as long as they're not in Zoom fatigue, or if it's sending a cake and some champagne to someone's house to just celebrate a particularly well done customer interaction or an anniversary, just replicating those things that we used to do really well in the call center, putting balloons on someone's desk and having a bit of a meet up in the canteen with them. That's what we've got to really do a lot more of, is celebrating people. Like you said, it's been a really tough year. People have gone through tough situations personally, and they've also had the customers reflected situations onto them as well. So we've gone through an awful lot, and I think it's time to sort of celebrate even small aspects of what people do and sort of keep doing that regularly and make those celebrations quite public as well, so that people see the gratitude and the reward for this.
I think oh, sorry, Martin. I was just going to say, I think that's a great point. Again, I take it back to my experience when I was a team leader and then a manager, and I got told the best form of success is just going up to someone, pat them on the back and say, job well done. That small recognition can go a far way, and you're right, we probably haven't done enough. We're very good at focusing on the negative in our industry rather than on the positives, and I think it's a fantastic point, Richard, that we need to start recognizing success more, because we don't do it enough. We really don't.
And the bit I was going to add is around recognising that people have lives beyond what you would normally see them sat with. So I think I've put myself on mute a couple of times as the dog has started barking. Dogs have now become the de facto accessory for these kind of meetings. Children, I've also been encouraged to see more and more people do conference calls, walking, and actually how do you replicate the walking around the call centre, walking around the office, popping out for a bite to eat as those brain breaks that we would have previously had. So I think actually all of those things add up to not only your physical well-being, but also just the social well-being, not just mental, but actually people are humans, and you can still have the water cooler chat. And the child walking in dressed as a princess, as I once had, certainly knows how to break a mood when you're on a serious product governance committee. So those are the kind of behaviours. I think we would say, do we want to have it all the time? No, but I think it does certainly start to spark people into realising you're not on your own. I'm sat here 18,000 kilometres away talking about a global lockdown. You guys are in a lockdown. So it's actually recognising that no one's in a glorious utopia, and actually we need to recognise that, and that helps people get through the issue.
Some great points there. I love the celebration one. I think is so important. I think Ian's point, we tend to focus on the negatives. If you just look at anybody looking at our news just now, honestly, I mean, it's painful, isn't it? You really just want to not look at it, and yet you have to, because you have to keep informed. So I think some of the points that we've had reflected back are that normally when people are going in and out of work, they go in and they deal with lots of difficult things, but then they can go away again. On the journey home, they can try and diffuse some of it and forget about it and distance themselves. Well, if you're dealing with lots of difficult calls at home, there is no distance. The same room, it's, if you have a traumatic call, you're in that same room. So I think there's lots of energies required for us just to understand what does that actually mean to people. And how do we make it better? And I think that great point about celebration is a great place. We are certainly going to be celebrating with the awards this year. We're devastated that I think normally about this time we'd be doing our getting ready for gala dinner, and there'll be all sorts of stuff getting planned for. That's now been put forward into March, and it will be a virtual, but we're going to do everything we can to make it as special as we can. So lots of people have put in for the awards so far, and again, a huge amount of people wanting to celebrate and really wanting to tell stories about the amazing efforts that people have gone to in any part of the world. I mean, and I think that's the really important thing, that everybody has been going through this, albeit in different ways, but all together. So I'd like to thank all of our contributors today. I'd like to thank Richard and Martin and Ian for just giving us so much insight and so much practical help and tips. So thank you to everyone, and good luck, and speak soon. Thank you.
And I'd like to add our thanks too to everyone for taking part in that debate, to Anne-Marie, Richard, Ian and Martin, who of course has a life and is probably asleep now in New Zealand. Thank you very much from all of us. And I do hope, Anne-Marie, that the cake is on the way. Richard Kenny and Ian Banks are here though. And we do have a few questions that have come through the chat. Now, Richard, I've also noticed that as the chat's been going on, you've been answering some of those. And so I'm going to go to Ian therefore first and say, Ian, Paul Twine has asked, does the panel believe the phrase team player and team management will evolve in a world where people may be working from home and not returning to an office environment? So you might want to comment on that. And he also says, how does the panel feel organizations must protect elderly and vulnerable customers who traditionally would have made that contact face to face, and now chat is preferred for many organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I'll take the first part of the question. Is it going to evolve? I think the simple answer is yes. And in the chat, you see Natalie goes on to talk about how the role's redesigning. I think when we talk about team player and team management, and I mean, the definition of the word team is a group of individuals all heading towards the same collective goal. So I don't think in terms of the direction of what the output from the team is going to change, but how the team interacts with each other to drive that collective goal is going to fundamentally shift. And I think the frontline ambassadors have a role to play in that, but I also do believe the team leader, team manager, management function is going to play also a very pivotal point in that process. How do they ensure that interaction takes place? And I think that's where we're going to see the evolution of the team leader really become even more. And I talked about it in the session there, that they are the engine room to this process. And if they are not ensuring that the agents have a position that they can speak openly and give those types of ideas, then the team will ultimately fail. So it's trying to ensure that employees have accessibility, they have a forum to put across their points of view, but they also have a leader who is going to be able to take those points in a non-face-to-face environment and do something with them. So I agree with Natalie's comment on the chat. You're going to see the evolution of the team leader and management become really prominent. The second question on dealing with vulnerable and elderly customers, I think Richard answered it really well also, and I totally agree with him that the access point isn't going to change. It's about accessibility for every demographic that organisations deal with. So the voice channel isn't going to go away, and it's important that if a customer wants to interact with you on voice, you still have that opportunity to interact back with the customer on voice. So it's about choice and accessibility. I don't see voice going away. Yes, there's a big shift to push to digital channels, but organisations who don't give voice as a channel of choice, I think they will struggle when it comes to the full customer lifecycle experience.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Richard, can I just ask you, Chrisanna Martin has asked, how do you think businesses will ensure that there's no reversion to type? And how do we harness the positive elements to lay the foundation for a brilliant blended future working environment? Have you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, to kind of build on the answer that I put there, we need to move to this business as unusual. We need to recognize that there has been quite a significant change. And one of the big triggers in that is the forecast that about 20% of call center employees will continue to work from home after this pandemic's finished. Now, when you've kind of lost that many people in the room, they're somewhere else, you've got this trigger of, I need to do something different. There's a big enough amount of people that you have to change the way that you look after people, you change the way that you communicate with those people, and that will drive a change in your business processes. And it's kind of good. You know, I've been attending the CCA conferences for years now, and it's really nice to kind of start off with sweary Mark earlier on that was talking about the need to be human an awful lot more, and the need to, detrain engineers, and hands up here, I am a trained engineer, to be more human. And the idea of training those team leaders to be more human will make us sort of look after our people an awful lot more, and that will trickle out to looking after our customers a lot more. So I think there's enough change here that the pandemic's driven that will cause us to think differently about the way we do things in the future.
Thank you for that. Now, a final one from Bernard Mooney, who says, how do we deal with the loss of opportunities when people have those on-the-spot discussions that we can't necessarily capture? And how do we capture the silent voices in the room? Can I put that to both of you?
Yeah, I've kind of answered it already, but again, it's back to this idea that I think 2% of people work remotely prior to the pandemic. And when it's that small a number, you're a real exception. People forget about you quite easily. When I first started my career, I was the one person working remotely, or you're the one person working in a different geographic location, and you get forgotten about really easy. All of a sudden, when the manager's gone through that working remotely, and when a fifth of the team is now working remotely, again, it's a business as unusual. You have to make a change because your underlying assumptions have fundamentally shifted here.
And a final word to you, Ian.
Yeah, I think it's a great point Bernard mentioned there, and I love the phrase actually silent voices, because as a manager, picking up on those silent voices is key. I think for me, it's around the culture that the organization puts in, empowering employees to not be silent, and giving them that voice to be louder, and giving them a forum to actually position it. We call it and within TTEC, we call it Culture CX, where every single employee from agent right through to the CEO has a voice to be heard, and giving them a platform for that voice to be heard. So for me, the key to Bernard's point is how organizations really rely now on culture and explore how that culture can improve in a digitally changing world at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Ian Banks, who is Group Vice President TTEC, and Richard Kenny. Sorry, I don't know why I've got Kennedy in my head. Richard Kenny, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Poly, and thank you both for being our sponsors as well. And now, for our final magical presentation of this morning from magician Kevin Quantum. Kevin was the first magician ever to appear at the Globe Theatre. He's the great magician scientist of live events, performing his award-winning 5-star show everywhere from Adelaide to Edinburgh Festival to the Magic Castle in Hollywood, Los Angeles. Kevin will be joined by Stuart Baldwin, his colleague, today, and he will be back with us tomorrow and Thursday, but he's here today to teach us how to become webinar wizards. With the new normal here to stay, we need to make our interpersonal skills, we need to take them to a new level, and Stuart and Kevin are here with the magic wand.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin. I'm not wearing my magic hat right now today. I'll be back tomorrow with the full show, but welcome to Webinar Wizards, which is a very brief 15-minute taster for a full day course that I run with Stuart, my co-host, and Colin, called also Webinar Wizards. So what's the purpose? Well, just very briefly, I'll bring up the slide share here. Wizardry at its best. Excellent. We believe that the traditional rules for presenting and influencing and speaking no longer apply in this virtual world. And it's really time to up your game by discovering some of the deeper secrets of being what we call magical online. So as you know, my name's Kevin Quantum, and this is my co-host, Stuart Baldwin.
Hi there. Good morning. Let me ask you a question in the chat box. So if you could open up your chat box for me, that would be great. And the question I want to ask you is, which of these 5 things, height, death, insects, speaking in public, or darkness, are you most afraid of? Which of those 5 things are you most afraid of? So you can either cut and paste it from my list and stick it below, or just write the word in, or just put a number in, but just help us out in the chat box for us for a moment. Let's get a check in. Let's see which of these 5 things are we most afraid of. Okay, so we're saying death, we're saying height, death, darkness, death, death, death. I've brought us into death. That's a good start, isn't it? That absolutely makes sense. For me, it would be death too. That makes sense. But if we look at the data, and I've just pasted the data into the chat box for you, most people, the greatest fear of most people is speaking in public, which seems ridiculous, doesn't it? That we would be more afraid of speaking in public than we are of dying, which may remind you of a Jerry Seinfeld joke. He said that if you're at someone's funeral, you'd rather be the guy in the coffin than the guy making the speech. But we got to ask ourselves why that is. You know, why are we so afraid of speaking? Not perhaps us collectively, but people generally. It's because the stakes of it are so high. When we interact, both public speaking and in small groups, we are being judged. Our survival instinct from our evolutionary past has taught us that this matters. So it's a high risk activity when we interact with people. When the last panel presented, it's a moment of risk. We want to come across well, but it's also a high reward activity, obviously, when we interact with people. And that's what we want to explore today.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. So just a little bit about us both. Firstly, myself, as you know, I'm a magician, and tomorrow I'm really looking forward to doing what I would do in front of a camera virtually these days, is deliver a small part of my show. But I'm also a presenter, and like one of the last panelists, I'm also an engineer. And this year I took all 3 of those elements to the semi-finals of Britain's Got Talent, notably being called a sexy Doctor Who by none other than David Walliams, one of the judges on that. Now, when I'm not performing on stage at festivals or corporate events, I'm delivering virtual shows like the one you'll see tomorrow, and presentations like the one you'll see just now.
Fantastic. So a little bit about us to get us warmed up. Myself, I come from a broadcasting background. I spent 15 years in broadcasting, and then the last 12 years have been in training. The 15 years in broadcasting, I was running big radio stations, running some television stations, but for the last 12 years in the training world, empowering leaders to bring out the best in their teams. And it was fascinating for me listening to the last panel discussion, because that's the work I'm doing a lot of at the moment with leaders around mental health and resilience, around leading change, around leading remotely, and leading in deeply human ways. It's very interesting to hear that. We also have a 3rd member of our team. It's Colin Hiles. Colin is my mentor, and he's one of the world's greatest behavioral change experts. And together, the 3 of us, we are the Webinar Wizards.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Stuart. So just to frame everything here, I don't think there's anything that's going to really completely shock you, but it is worth recognizing a few things. First of all, the new normal is here to stay. I guess handshakes are out and FaceTime is in, and it's been like this for a while. FaceTime's been here for a while. It's grown massively, and it looks like it's here to stay with us a bit longer. And this shift requires you and us to all take our interpersonal skills online, which is, I guess, what we've been doing. But it also means the traditional ideas of speaking, presenting, influencing, rallying the troops, selling ideas, they no longer apply in this new world of Zoom and WebEx and Teams. And also, finally, I guess, our point is that it's time now to shed the rookie moves and become an online wizard. You're seeing it. We're seeing it. When we all started this whole world, it was maybe quite novel. It was okay to make a few rookie errors, but we don't think so. No longer. It's now time for all of us to up our game in this space and become webinar wizards. So what we want to do is give you some of the video conferencing tactics, or tricks as we've called them, and liberate you from some of the potentially harmful misconceptions that you may have about this new medium. Because being good now in this new virtual world is a must-have skill.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And it's interesting to look at, so what do we do as leaders? What do we do as people? What do our teams do when they interact? We are presenting ourselves constantly, aren't we? In every moment, we are interacting. Before you came on this conference today, I imagine many of you interacted with your teams in some kind of way. And the people that you work with a lot in customer service, interacting with people all the time. Every time we show up and we interact, we put our careers on the line. Our interpersonal skills are crucial. Every conversation we have, when we walk into a meeting and take a seat, the way we sit is being judged. It's something called thin slicing, where we judge people very, very quickly. We're being judged on, should we be here? Should I listen to this person? Do they come across as credible? Do they have warmth? Do they have confidence? Do I trust they're going to do what they say they're going to do? This is survival instinct. We need to be able to judge people very quickly. It's the same in the animal kingdom. Snakes, lobsters, all judge each other very, very quickly. In every conversation we have, we're being judged. So in person, we're okay at that. Most of us could be better, but we're okay at it. Online, it's very interesting because it's different. And again, listening to the panel discussion earlier about losing some of that humanity, that's what we lose online. So understanding how we connect with energy, charisma, confidence, intelligence, how we make a human connection through the screen is really important. It's about impact in every situation.
Great. Yeah. So when you join us for the full day course, there's three main areas that we're going to cover, and that is energy, content, and engagement. Stuart will tell us a bit more about those.
Yeah. So these are our three pillars. Energy is about how we connect through the screen with energy. It's actually about a broadcasting skill. There's a shift we've got to make to be broadcasters. And it's about body language and how we connect. Content, the second thing, is about how we land our ideas with simplicity, punchiness, and presence, so that people can not only remember what we've shared, but can act on it. And this is much trickier online. It's tricky in person, but it's much trickier online. And the third one is engagement. We all know how hard it is to stay engaged when communicating online. It's blooming hard to keep people engaged in a room, right? But online, it's even harder. And what's interesting is the ways we keep people connected to us, engaged online, are very different to the ways we do it in the room. So these are three ways we want to become pro. We want to become wizards. And for us, there's three tricks, three tactics that we share with you to help you to do that. These are practical, deliverable, everyday takeaway things. The first one from Energy Spell is about broadcasting and body language. Rule of 3 from content is about a structure, a really cool little structure that teaches us a way to communicate anything quickly and easily in a way that can be received. And stop is about knowing that we have to pause. We can't just broadcast all the time and get interaction, and the ways to do that light up brain pathways that mean people stay engaged for longer.
Yeah, so this morning I'd like to give you a little bit of a chat through the energy section. And I'm going to start with, again, a question for everyone. And that's this: how long do you think it takes to make a first impression? And again, we're going to use a chat for this. So if you think it's half a minute or 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you think, just type that into the chat just now for me, please. I'll come back to them in a moment. Thanks very much. Now, on the full day course, this section that we're going to go into a lot of depth in it, but today I'm only going to cover a very small section. And it's going to be in 3 parts. The first part I'm going to discuss is my screen story. The second is the science behind that. And the third is an upskill that I learned that I hope you can use as well. So firstly, my story. Earlier this year, I did a spot on television on a TV show called Britain's Got Talent. I got all the way to the semi-finals. I've done a few TV presentations before, but this was a really big deal for me. It's one of the biggest shows in the world. Because if you do well at it, then you can expect to be seen around the world by tens of millions of people. However, if you do badly, you can expect to be seen by hundreds of millions of people. Now, this is a little scene from my audition, which happened just before lockdown. I think it was February time, where I was just about to go on stage. You'll see Ant and Dec with me. I'll play that video for you just now. Simon Cowell was one of the judges, as was David Williams. Here we go.
All the best. On to the start. On to the start of the chat of the day. Please be good.
Please be good. I love that line. I think that's probably whenever I see any kind of presentation, that's the thing that also goes through my head as well. Now let's have a quick look at the chat. Now, by analysing my own performance and those of many others, I found there was a number of really interesting conclusions. In the short time I've got with you, I just want to share just one of those. Now, my lockdown story was that when everything kicked in, as it did for all of us in the entertainment world, I also had to make changes. I had to take the skills that I'd learned from being on stage and then apply that virtually. Now, the science behind all of that is really fascinating. But before I get into that, I'll just bring up the chat very quickly. Let's see. And yeah, we've got 10 seconds, 20, 15, 10, 2 seconds, less than a minute. Yeah, everyone's in the right ballpark. The exact number is 7 seconds. We discovered a number of really interesting things from TED Talks when we were putting together the Webinar Wizards course, and this is just one of them. And once you've made that first impression, it's very difficult to change people's impressions of you. So it's a really good idea to get it right first time. Now, in that time, your brain is processing 3 different types of information: the words that you're using, the tone of voice, and most importantly, your body language. Now, I'm going to ask you again to use your chat. In those first 7 seconds, what do you think is the most important part of your body? So again, just type that. It could be your hands, your core, your face, your smile, your lips, your eyes. Just write into the chat what you think the most important thing is in those 7 seconds. Again, I will just quickly have a look. So face, smile, eyes, face, eyes, smile, face, icon. It's pretty much everything is happening in this area here: face, smile, that sort of thing. Well, let me show you this. Hope I don't scare too many of you with this. This is a picture called Ugly Man. It's a representation created by psychologists of how our brain codes, because of their built-in survival mechanism, someone else's body language. Now, the bits of the body that are most important are weighted larger. And you'll notice that by far and away, the biggest are the hands. Now, our brains give a disproportionate amount of attention to the palms, the fingers, compared to the rest of the body. Why the hands? Because, well, they can hold tools, they can hold weapons, they can show welcome, or they can show aggression. Now, when I was on Britain's Got Talent, let me just come back out of that. When I was on Britain's Got Talent, in those first 7 seconds, the cameramen or women always at least had me in shot from my waist up, and more often than not, a full body shot. Instinctively, the camera person always wants to give you, the audience, the best first impression they can get. Even if you think about when you're watching a news report, when you're watching television, you always see the presenter with their hands in shot. So what do I want to encourage you to do at the end of this little part is just really adopt what we call broadcast position. Now, most people use work position when they're on a Zoom. It's when you're close to your computer, and there's lots of good reasons for that. Maybe you have to type when you're on a call or do some kind of presentation. And that's absolutely fine. But if it's possible, we'd like to suggest to you to adopt what we call broadcast position, to move back a little bit further from your screen. And then you can convey so much more information. You can get your body in shot, and you can totally nail that first 7 seconds. So this is an image here of Colin, the third presenter that Stuart mentioned, demonstrating how it looks. And just a couple of things to note from this. You really want to get your hands in shot. There's a little bit of space above his head. You can probably just see that there. And there's cameras also set at eye level. So he's talking to you as you would if you were having a normal face-to-face conversation. So really, for me, in summary, I just want to leave you with just a few things. My virtual story started on Britain's Got Talent. My world turned upside down very shortly after that with lockdown. I wasn't able to tour comedy club stages. All of that was gone. But what's your virtual story? Whether you're on a video call or national television, you're really always presenting. And I know context absolutely matters. But sometimes it's a call with a boss. Other times you're rallying the troops or a group presentation. But now that you know the science, I hope you can decide what you want to do in your presentations. It might not be possible every time, but if you do know about this, then you have the option to upskill your virtual game if you want to. So the only takeaway I want to leave with you is to give it a shot, practice it, see if it makes a difference in your presentations.
Thanks, Kevin. And the hands thing is so interesting. We've been running this course, the full course, like a day, sometimes 2 days, with a lot of people recently. And we just finished an ASDA senior leaders group, teaching them this stuff over a day. And the framing in the hands, as soon as they got their hands in the shot, they were such better communicators. And Kevin there has touched on part one of our 3-part model, energy, and a little bit from the trick spell, which is liberate the hands. The second area is content, and I want to touch on that very briefly because my background is broadcasting. I started in radio in 1994, and we had a lot of fun, but I was ambitious, and in 1999 moved to Viking FM to run that station along with my boss in Hull, very glamorous location. And we needed a new breakfast show. The breakfast show had just been taken, and so we put together these two guys called JK and Joel, who went on to have other successes. You may have seen them on television, heard of them on Radio 1 or other places like that. But wanting a winning breakfast show wasn't actually our main reason for putting them together. JK was on the show already on his own, and Joel was doing a different show, but he was killing himself. He was partying like crazy. He was drinking every night, waking up with all kinds of different women, taking drugs. Life was not great for him. We wanted a way to save him. We needed to give him more meaning in his life. But let me ask you a question. Joel did a different show on the radio station, and I had to get him out of bed 3 times a week. I'm not exaggerating, to be in time for that show. He was all over the place. The question I want to ask you is, what time did his show start? In the chat box for me. What time did the radio program that Joel did, that I had to go and get him out of bed for 3 times a week, start? Just stick a number in the chat box for me, just for fun. What time did his show start? I got a 2 p.m., a 7 p.m., a 2 p.m. Who's that? Tom, you nailed it at 4 p.m. He was doing the drive time show in the afternoon, 4 p.m., and had to go and get him out of bed. We needed to give him something else to do. So he joined Jason on that morning program. And we then had a task. How do you turn this undisciplined pair of early 20s party animals into a ratings winner? And there were lots of things we did, but there is one content trick that I want to share with you now that is simple. We can all do it, whatever it is we're presenting, and it's gold. We would score everything. We would score content before we broadcast it. So when we're preparing a show, we'd go through every section of the show and score it out of 10. And after the program, we'd go through the whole program, score each section out of 10. And there was 2 things we were looking to do. One, we were looking to have everything over a 7. We did a ton of audience research. When you drop below a 7, you lose people. Same with presenting in these mediums. And then the other thing we learned from audience research is pick the 9s, the things that really work, that people love, that you love, and repeat, repeat, repeat. If you have a great story, if you have a great bit of research, if you have a line that works every time, and listening to the panelists early on, a couple of great lines, you know, there was one about the new normal, but someone put it really, really beautifully. You repeat, you repeat, you repeat the bits that you know work really, really well. So let me ask you a question again in the chat box. How often do you score yourself on your interpersonal communications? A pitch, a presentation, a meeting, a one-to-one with your boss? Just in the chat box for me, put always, sometimes, never. How often do you score yourself on your interpersonal communications? Always, sometimes, never. Mostly nevers, one always, which is amazing, sometimes. Let me ask you a different question. How often do you get feedback from other people on your interpersonal communications? And I don't just mean pitches, presentations. I also mean, how did I run that meeting? How did I do that one-to-one? How often do you score how often do you get feedback from other people? Always, sometimes, never. I got a never, a rarely, a sometimes, and often from Dan. So I've got 3 tips for you that are based in this idea. The first tip is you could score yourself for content before everything you do. The second is you could score your content after everything you've done. Super easy to do. And the third is that in this medium, we can record and review so much more easily. It's an easy go-to thing to do. If we create a feedback loop, we can improve our performance. We can score our stuff before, score our stuff after, and record and get feedback for ourselves. What we noticed is when we did that with radio programs, with breakfast shows, and with television programs, we could see audience figures rise consistently. Favorability would rise consistently. Score, score, score. Get feedback like a pro. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. So there's one tip from our second area of content. And in that second area of content, we teach you something deeper than that. Score is just a little taster. We teach you the rule of 3 tool when we do the full training. And this is one of the coolest little things I've ever learned. Colin and I have used it with C-suite clients for major FTSE 100 companies when making pitches to the board. I used to use it for creating advertising and promotional content on the radio. You can use it in a 3-minute pitch to someone when you're in an elevator. You can use it to communicate anything, including to win an argument with your spouse. And we've just finished 2 big sessions with the ASDA senior guys, like I mentioned. And I just got their feedback scores this morning. We got 9.7 as an average score for this piece of training. It's beautiful training. But the one thing that they remembered and loved the most was rule of 3. It's a really neat little trick to help us land content, crucially, so that people act on it, not just remember it.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Stuart. I'm just going to finish up with a recent statistic that we found from Google, Google research. It shows that people are 40% less likely to take an action after a virtual meeting than after a face-to-face meeting. So with Webinar Wizards, what we're trying to do is improve that 40%, which is incredibly high. I didn't realize that until I saw the statistic. We want to increase your effectiveness virtually so that you can influence key stakeholders to embrace your ideas. Let me bring that up as a slide. Embrace your ideas. Accept your recommendations, and of course, support your initiatives. Well, that's everything from us, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll leave a slide up with my email address. Stuart's also going to write this into the chat. If you want any more information, do drop me an email. Thank you very much for your time. From Stuart, myself, and Colin, who's sadly absent, have a wonderful afternoon. Take it easy.
And thank you very, very much indeed from us. If there could be a round of applause, we'd certainly be giving you one now. Thank you. Absolutely terrific way to end the first morning at the CCA Annual Convention 2020. And you'll be back with us tomorrow and on Thursday. Now, you may be 40% less likely to take an action, but the action you've got to take tomorrow is to join us again at 10 o'clock. And I am not coming to get you up in time to get there for 10 o'clock. So we'll see you all tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. What I would like to do is just finally thank today's sponsors, who are our gold sponsors, Ring Central, Twilio and T-Tech, silver sponsors, Polly and Tiski, and research partner, Contact Babel. As I said, see you tomorrow. Thank you to everybody who has taken part. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Anne-Marie. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Mark Blythe, and see you tomorrow.